let's turn our attention to some of those results that you published recently that got a lot of worldwide headlines. And the two biggest points are 14 of the 20 terrestrial amino acids were identified in the samples, as well as all the 5 nucleobases, the basic building blocks of life that, as I mentioned in the onset, molecular biologists like me are just, fascinated with and work with on a daily basis. So can you give us a rundown as to the importance of those results and maybe what that tells us about potential of life being elsewhere in the universe?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, obviously, the focus with people has been on the detection of amino acids that are used by living systems on the Earth now, because that seems to be pretty obviously potentially related to how life got here. But actually, of equal interest in many respects is the fact that we also found a lot of other amino acids that aren't used by life. And so, and in fact, a whole host of organic compounds, tens of thousands of them that are not necessarily used by life now. So this tells you that the processes that led up to making the Bennu sample that we grabbed, and these may have been processes that occurred in many different locations over large spans of time, supported a very rich organic chemistry that made all kinds of things. Okay. And this chemistry is not biological chemistry. I mean, biological chemistry on the Earth is very productive, but it doesn't make everything. It makes specific things it can use. Right. And so what we're seeing is a much richer chemistry, a much richer population of things, which tells us that we were getting stuff from abiotic processes that were making everything from soup to nuts, so to speak. But not biologically speaking, and that this material was there waiting to be delivered to the surface of a planet. So this kind of tells you that the universe is apparently hardwired to make complex organic populations of materials. And so when you make a planet, this stuff is probably delivered, and then it's available to get going. And since we don't really understand how life got started, it's hard to assess the importance of any given molecule or set of molecules. But if you have a little bit of everything, then who's to complain, right? And then if you get life going, life starts. Once you get evolution going, life figures out a way to do everything better, and it decides what's the best stuff to use and what it doesn't care about so much. And then you winnow down the population to a more discrete set of things that we now see in modern life. So we see the 14 of the amino acids that's used by life, but we see a lot of other amino acids. And who's to say those amino acids weren't important for getting life started?
Sure.
But later on, we found a better way. It's the same thing with the nucleobases. We see plenty of nitrogen heterocycles that could have been nucleobases potentially, but for whatever reason weren't selected or didn't work. And so I think one of the most profound things about this, and this is something I've known for a long time based on other things as well, that the universe is hardwired to make complex organics. It just does it. In the other half of my life, I work in a laboratory, which is on the other side of the door over here, where we can simulate environments in outer space, in particular very cold ones like the surface of Pluto, comets, the interstellar dense molecular clouds, where we process with radiation mixed molecular ices of the type we have identified in space using telescopes. And that radiation processing of ices makes these compounds. I can make amino acids in my lab. I can make nucleobases. I can make sugars. I can make all these compounds that life uses. And these are using processes that must happen every time you make a planetary system. So I think you make planets, this stuff will come in most cases. And so insofar as the delivery of this kind of material plays a role in getting life started, I think it really raises the odds that life is not all that rare out there. I mean, I don't know how common it is, but it can't be uncommon. It can't be so rare that you'll never find it anywhere else.
And the interesting thing about these amino acids, and you sort of alluded to evolution and biology finding the best way forward, is that these amino acids were racemic, and meaning that about 50-50 in terms of populations of D version and L version. For those that are not familiar, molecules come in two mirrored forms. And on planet Earth, biology has sort of leaned towards the left-handed version.
Yeah, leaned hard. For anyone who doesn't understand the whole idea of chirality, there are some classes of molecules that can have the same chemical formula but have different mirror image structures. And the best example I can give easily is my hands. So my hands have the same chemical structure: one palm, one thumb, four fingers. They both have that chemical structure. And they look similar, but they're not the same, because when you go like this, you find out the thumb is sticking out on the wrong side. So that's why I have a left hand and a right hand. And amino acids have this same property, that they can have a handedness. They can be in the D or the L form, right, or left-handed. And for whatever reason, and lots of people love to argue about this, particularly over beers, life chose to use left-handed amino acids, and we don't know why that is. It could have been a luck of the draw. I mean, it could have just been, that some puddle got started with left-handed first, and then it's the winner, and we're done. Or it could have been that there was some subtle thing driving us in one direction or the other. And there are processes that can do that, although you can argue about whether they're strong enough or would have happened in the right circumstances to do this. But it's possible that it's just a flip of the coin, in which case, we could run into aliens that use amino acids like us, but they use the other handedness of amino acids, which might be convenient, because then we can't eat each other. So we can be friends, but not cook each other.
Right. So the point being is that the amino acids on Bennu came in about 1-to-1 ratio of the left and the right.
And so when I told you I can make amino acids in the lab back there, but when I do that, I make racemic mixtures. I make equal fractions of each. And that's because most abiotic chemistry doesn't care which kind it makes. And so you get half and half. And so one of the big questions for the Bennu samples is, well, if we go there, is it going to be 50-50, or is there going to be, will we favor one of the handedness? Because it would have been fascinating to find out that the amino acids on Bennu were predominantly, or at least even slightly more rich in the left-handed amino acids, because then you could ask, well, maybe the left-handed amino acid bias on the Earth got started because the stuff that was delivered already had that bias, and therefore this bias was established in space, not on Earth.
That would have been a fascinating result, huh?
Yeah. So, but so far, all the measurements show equal mixtures, which tells you, it tells you a bunch of things. It tells you that the amino acids we're looking at are not contamination, because if they were, they would be biased towards left-handed, because Earth's contaminants would be left-handed.
Right. So
it tells us the stuff we're looking at is from Bennu. It tells us that the material is abiotic. It wasn't made by life, even on Bennu. And so it was made by some abiotic process, or probably processes, during the history of the parent body. And then it's been now sitting around waiting for us to show up and grab it and measure it. So that was a fascinating result. I don't know what my expectations were, but there were some reason to believe, from at least measurements of some meteorites, that we might find left-handed excesses. So it was a possibility. And so I think maybe there were some people on the team who kind of were surprised that it was so perfectly racemic, because like I say, there has been some meteorite data that suggests maybe under some cases there have been left-handed excesses. So now we have to go visit that meteorite data, because I don't think you can explain the left-handed excesses in meteorites solely by contamination, or at least not simple contamination. So there's still an option that maybe Bennu is racemic, but other asteroids did something a little different. We still have questions, lots of questions. But certainly the amino acids we've measured so far are completely compatible with abiotic synthesis on or before the asteroid. And tell us that the universe can make amino acids for us, but it isn't at least necessarily going to tell us which one to use.
So how have these results, if I may ask, changed or affected your outlook on that question of whether or not there might be life out there?
Oh, well, I've thought for a long time that life is probably moderately common out there. I mean, so I've been doing this lab work for the better part of 40 years now. And over all that time, we've demonstrated that, you pick any class of organic compound, modestly simple one, not DNA, but nucleobases, sugars, amphiphiles, quinones, you name your compound, I can make it in the lab, no problem. And you expect these things to be made in space all the time. So like I say, if you make a new planetary system anywhere in the universe, there's an excellent chance that a very complex mixture of organic compounds is going to be deposited on the surface. So insofar as that's a critical step to getting life going, I think you've got excellent chances of getting a start. Now, whether all the other conditions necessary to get life are present on a planet is another question. I mean, we don't totally know, since we don't know how life got started, we don't really know what the critical parameters are. But if you think of life as being an incredibly complex Lego castle, I can tell you that Legos land on planets all the time. So
That's a wonderful way to put it.
To make a castle, that's another issue, and how hard that is to do is another issue. But certainly there are aspects of it that seem like a slam dunk to me. And so at least at that level, I would not be even slightly surprised if life is quite common in the universe. Now, most of it is likely not to be intelligent. A lot of it may look like pond scum. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of these planets may have life, but Saturday night isn't any more interesting than Friday night. But it may be quite common. Like I say, I really do think the universe, just because of the nature of the physical laws of physics and chemistry, kind of hardwired in the environments that make stars and planets to make complex organic compounds. They're out there and pretty much everywhere.
Now, what would you say to somebody, and I've dealt with this, and scientists who deal with either the really big or the really small, sort of two ends of the spectrum, which are very intangible to people who are not scientists. And so people who are not scientists, let's just say lay people, oftentimes have a problem with sort of, let's say on the small end, you're working with molecules and enzyme and DNA, and you can't see these things yet. We know what's happening from the data we collect, and we interpolate and extrapolate and come up with theories and hypotheses. But people just have a tough time sometimes saying, well, you can't know that for sure because I can't see the molecule, or you can't jump to that conclusion because you're using a radio telescope to deduce the shape of a planet that I can't lay my eyes on. Do you know what I'm trying to get across?
So I mean, this is the seeing is believing aspect,
right?
As I said. Yes. So, but the fact of the matter is, you accept things all day, every day that you can't see, but you know from vast experience or so, and that's because we don't just. I mean, we do have senses, we have our ears and our eyes and things, but the way we process that information is with our brain. Okay. Right. And we can use our brains to understand the universe around us using a whole host of tools and not just our physical senses. So, scientists have, spend their lives learning a giant toolbox of skills of ways to poke and prod the universe, and these tools are subjected to just a huge numbers of tests to validate them, to make sure they really work and that they fit together. And then once you have a tool that works, then you can use that to learn new things. And sometimes the most interesting things you learn is that when a tool maybe starts to break down, then you know that there's something more sophisticated going on than you imagined. I mean, for a long time we got along with Newton's laws, but then eventually we found out Newton's laws as a tool broke down, and that's when we got into relativity.
It's a perfect example, and then you start to break down even further when you have the quantum that doesn't.
And so some of the most exciting times in science are, in fact, when the way you think should work don't quite work, because that's telling you there's some new science to find. If every time you measure something you get exactly what you expect, then you're validating your model, but you're not necessarily expanding that model or learning anything new. I know a lot of people feel like when scientists work on stuff that their number one goal is to get data, to get facts. Mm-hmm. But facts are not, I mean, they're important, but they're not what you're really trying to do. You're really trying to build up models of how the universe works, and the facts tell you whether your model is right or wrong. And and facts, strangely enough, can sort of change. Someone can measure the mass of the electron and give you a number to 8 significant digits, and they've done an excellent job of that. But that fact will change because at some point someone will be able to measure it to 12 significant digits, and the number will be a little different. Okay, so it's not incompatible with the old measurement, but it's a new fact, right? And you have to make sure that fact is compatible with the models. And so, just measuring a bunch of facts is not it. I mean, there's a sort of the movie version of a scientist where they're sitting around a lab coat holding a clipboard, and you get this impression that they spend their day sitting around in their office, knowing stuff. It's not how I spend my days. I spend most of my days slightly perplexed, trying to figure out how does this work? What's going on here? And what experiment or test do I need to carry out to help sort this out? Okay. And so I spend most of my life at the front of research, slightly befuddled, while I try to deal with the things I don't understand yet. The things I do understand are in my toolbox. I can use those to help me understand what's going on. But in terms of actual new, fresh research, you need to be pushing this envelope.
Right. And even for everybody, and including those with the sort of skepticism I outlined, their lives depend on it every single day when it comes to certain medicines or.
Well, I mean, they use the GPS on their phone to navigate all the time, and the GPS works because we understand the principles of general relativity, and they can't see any of that with their senses, but it works, and it totally fits with all the models, and so it's an application that they use every day probably, but they can't see it. So they, everybody believes a lot of stuff that they couldn't prove themselves if they had to, based on their senses.